The man accused of helping his girlfriend hide her 3-year-old daughter's body is now facing new charges. Police say Darrian Randle falsely claimed her daughter, Nola Dinkins, was abducted at gunpoint, but that story quickly unraveled. Investigators allege it was all a cover-up to hide the truth. The child was allegedly beaten to death. Randle is now charged with murder, and her boyfriend, Cedrick Britten, is facing new counts of child abuse in connection to Nola's death. Thanks for watching. I'm Kennedi Walker, and I'll walk you through the details. You're watching Law & Crime. It was 1 month ago when 3-year-old Nola Dinkins was discovered in a suitcase wrapped in Saran Wrap. But before the tragic discovery, her mother, Darrian Randle, had told police a very different story. She claimed her daughter had been kidnapped at gunpoint. Randle allegedly told Newcastle County Police that she had pulled over to comfort Nola, who had become upset, when a white man with a gun approached her vehicle and snatched the toddler. She said the suspect took off in a dark SUV driven by a white woman. That report triggered an Amber Alert and a full-scale search. The FBI and local agencies sprang into action, but just hours later, the truth began to unravel.
Detectives determined that the initial account of the investigation, of the incident given by the mother, was false. The Amber Alert is now canceled, and there is no danger to the public.
According to documents obtained by WBAL, Randle later allegedly admitted to investigators that she beat her daughter with a belt on the morning of June 9th inside her boyfriend Cedrick Britten's home until the little girl became unresponsive. Rather than call for help, investigators say the couple drove around with Nola's body in Britten's vehicle before eventually returning home. That night, police say they placed Nola's body inside a suitcase and left it in the basement. The next day, Randle allegedly asked Britten to dispose of the luggage. He took the luggage to the park, reportedly took a photo of the location, and sent it to Randle. According to court documents, Britten even drew police a map to the area. When investigators arrived, they found the suitcase. Inside was the 3-year-old completely wrapped in Saran Wrap. Both Randle and Britten were arrested.
At this time, the Maryland State Police have arrested 2 individuals connected to the disappearance of the 3-year-old who was the subject of an Amber Alert in Delaware.
Initially, Cedrick Britten was charged as an accessory, but now a superseding indictment has been filed, charging him with first-degree child abuse resulting in death, improper disposal of a body, and several other counts. In total, Britten now faces 11 charges. 2 of them carry the maximum penalty of life in prison. And here to break down this story with me is criminal defense attorney Jessica Lettingham. Jessica, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's just jump right in. What does this superseding indictment tell you about how prosecutors are building their narrative against Cedrick Britten?
Well, if we break it down, they originally had him charged with helping her after. They thought maybe he just helped his girlfriend put the body in the backpack and dump it. But now it's looking like he's a lot more involved in actually being a co-conspirator. From what I could tell from the facts, it seems like he might have been in the house during the beating. And that would be a huge reason of why they're charging him this way, because he could have stopped it. He could have, as soon as he saw the body, tried to call the hospital to revive her. I mean, they're not medical professionals, so it's very easy to say that she could have maybe survived if they had called the authorities right away.
Right. And does he now face more legal risk than Randle in some ways, given the nature of his upgraded charges?
I think they're at the same risk. They're both being charged at the same, with the same murder charge. So, but if he was to be found not guilty of this, they also have the other charges underneath. She might have given a deal because she talked so much to him. She might have more lenient charges coming her way, and that's why she turned so quickly. So I'm sure there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we don't know about.
Right. Yeah. And we'll get into the defense strategies in a moment. But just could Britten's alleged effort to help police find the body be viewed as damage control or too little too late legally?
I think that the defense is going to try to spin it as damage control. I think the prosecution and most people will see it as little too late. This is a mother that brutally beat her child and then stuffed her in a backpack. I think that it's going to be hard for anything that the defense does in this instance.
What kind of sentence could Mr. Britten be facing if he's convicted on all 11 charges? And what's realistically likely?
20 years. I think that would be the most likely in this instance. It could be even longer, but I think he'll get 15, 20 years. We are talking about him helping murder a little 3-year-old child.
And I realize every case is different, but in cases where a person is, being charged with 11 crimes, do we usually see them like a guilty verdict on all of them, or is it, give and take?
Well, it's give and take. And, it's also the prosecution is going to want to probably take this all the way to trial. This is a case that you usually don't plea out because it is an easy win and you do want justice to be on the face. That's why a lot of people were surprised at Koberger that the prosecution led to a plea deal there, because a lot of times when the prosecution has an easy win of a very brutal crime, they don't allow any type of plea and they want the maximum sentence on all charges.
And let's talk about that, right? Because again, we don't know how this is going to go, whether it'll go to trial or not. But if it does, I mean, what does that timeline look like? And if they choose not to, do they usually do that just because they don't have enough resources or they don't want to spend money and it's just an easier win, you could say, when there's a plea in a case like this one?
Absolutely. So a plea allows you to not expend the resources. Trials are very expensive for the prosecution because you have to have all these detectives come in, all these expert witnesses come in, and it takes away the resources of the prosecutor working on a different case. And that is why a plea could happen. Now, if it does go to trial, it depends on the defense. They have a right to a speedy trial, which means they could be back in court in 6 months, but a lot of times they don't want that because they want to build their defense. And then you're looking at a year or 2 years out before we actually have the trial.
Now, just getting into some more details, according to documents, the body was reportedly malnourished and wrapped in Saran Wrap. What might that level of concealment indicate to investigators?
It shows that they were abusing her beforehand, and it shows that they had the intent to conceal it and try to get away with it. They came up with a very elaborate ruse, and that's why we have so many heavy charges on both of them, because this wasn't just a heat of the moment, she beat her child once and then reported it right away. No, she was constantly beating her. They were starving her. And then they tried to come up with this ruse, and they had her in the suitcase for a full night, just down at the bottom of the stairs. It shows a level of depravity, which is why I could really see the prosecution wanting to take this to trial and letting people know that you do not get away with this type of crime.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that part about maybe it shows a history of alleged abuse, because sometimes, we see the defense argue that, oh, this was a one-time thing. Maybe it went too far. She didn't mean to. There was no intent there. But because of the condition of the body, I'm assuming that widens the case beyond a single moment of violence.
And I think that that is a huge part of why they bumped up his charge, right? So instead of him just helping afterwards, now he's actually helping during the process of the crime. And that's because we have a starvation of the child. We have the child being, it sounds like the child was actually beat beforehand, that this was not the first beating. It sounds like they were a very abusive couple to this 3-year-old daughter. And I'm very glad that the prosecution is going so hard on these charges for both of these individuals.
Well, do text messages or location data between Miss Randle and Mr. Britton become key in reconstructing the timeline, especially around the disposal?
Absolutely. And they're going to be looking at all of that. They obviously already have all the phones and the phone records in their possession. They will be tracking them and tracing their steps so you can see a play by play, not just afterwards, but also before. Make sure that you can show that both of them were in the house during the crime. When did this occur? And then they're going to be looking for text or pictures to show that there was a pattern of abuse of the child.
Now, we just touched on the fact that, according to police, the child's body was in that suitcase, at least overnight. Does putting the body in a suitcase and allegedly leaving it, just speak to premeditation or panic?
I think it speaks to both. I think that the defense is going to say it was panic. I think that the prosecution is going to say it was premeditation. It was not any remorse. They had zero remorse. They literally stuffed her away and put her out of their mind. All they cared about was themselves. And they're going to show that this is calculated, that it took him minutes to think of putting her and placing her in the suitcase.
Could Mr. Britten's defense team argue that he was manipulated or coerced? And how would a jury likely respond to that, if so?
The defense can argue whatever they want. As you pointed out, it's about the jury, and the jury is not going to buy that he was coerced, especially when it was his idea to come up with the suitcase. From what we've heard, she's alleging that. She's also alleging that he was the one who thought of burying her. I think they're both going to try to point the finger at the other one, and at the end of the day, I think the jury is going to find them equally culpable.
Right, because what role does just failure to act play in cases like this, especially for a non-biological partner like Mr. Britten?
And the prosecution is most likely going to show that there was a pattern of failure to act. And as we just discussed, they're going to be looking to see if he was abusive as well. And hearing a 3-year-old get beat with a belt 15 to 20 times, that's culpability. That's not just failure to act. That's allowing someone to murder someone right next to you. That is helping them and then immediately saying, here's the suitcase. That is why the prosecution bumped it up, because there is a clear intent of his to harm this child. Whether he acts on it or not, his intent is very clear.
Is it possible we'll see this case split? Because I know in situations like this, when we're looking at two people being charged, everyone is just trying to get the better deal. So, is that possible with each defendant tried separately, and why might prosecutors do that?
Well, we see that time and time again, that when you have couples and they're both being accused of a crime, that they will separate them out. And unfortunately, they will both usually testify against one another. It's very possible that the prosecution doesn't make a deal with either of them, that they want the max sentence for both of them. And even though her story is going to be that it was all his idea and his story is going to be he was just kind of there for the ride, I think it's going to be about believability. It's not just he said, she said. There's going to be a pattern. There's the starvation. There's the backpack. There's the phone tracking device. So even though they may allege a lot of things that they had very little culpability, the prosecution is going to build a strong case and look at all of the different evidence that you just asked about in this interview.
Now, I'm just wondering, because according to police, Nola's mother allegedly confessed to beating her child, and then Nola just never got up. So just wondering if this alleged confession is true, how can Randle face the same charges if she's admitted to it?
So aiding and abetting during a crime, how you can face those charges is because you were a part of the crime while it's happening. That is why I think, even though we don't have all of the story, it sounds like the police are alleging that he was in the home during the beating, and then immediately after he pulled out the suitcase. And it also seems like the police and the prosecution are going to allege that there is a pattern of abuse. So that's why we have the aiding and abetting and him helping during the crime, because he's sitting right there for however long as she is beating her child and punishing her. So because he had the intent of allowing it to happen and, not stopping her, that is why they bumped up the charges to aiding and abetting during the crime.
And we know that Nola's mother is also facing additional charges for allegedly lying to police about Nola being kidnapped. I mean, are those federal charges that we're looking at here? And could Mr. Britten be tied into that as well if the prosecutors think that they planned, made this plan together?
Absolutely. It could bump up to federal charges if the federal government wants to get involved. Maryland might just say, we're going to keep it state. And I think that any charges they could put on her at this point, they can also put on him, because he was living with her and it sounds like he was there during the entire commission of all of these crimes.
Would it be federal because it was two different states? Like, she reported her missing in Delaware, or in one state, but she lived in another. Like, how do the feds get involved in something like that?
Yes, because of the crossing of state lines, that is how the feds could potentially get involved if they want to. It depends on whether or not they're going to pursue the kidnapping charges, her alleging this kidnapping, but because she was alleging a kidnapping that happened in one state and crossing over to the other one. That is how the feds could get involved.
What's the likelihood that additional people could be charged if others knew what happened and maybe just didn't speak up?
Very possible, although I actually see that the prosecution, if they find that there's others, they're going to want to deal with them and make sure that they can get them to act as witnesses during potential trials rather than convict them as well. So you could really see that whole thing, be all about how do we build the strongest case against these two people to make sure that these two people never see the light of day.
Let's move to potential systemic failures in child welfare. What makes a 3-year-old especially vulnerable in abuse cases, both physically and legally?
Well, they don't have a voice. They can't speak up. And I think it's really difficult for teachers to get involved. They're terrified of getting involved, and you don't blame them. But I think it's important that people around really speak up. I also wish that there was less of a systemic failure in social services in the state of Maryland. I think Maryland I don't think that the resources are there for social services to get involved in every case that they should. And unfortunately, the funding's not there to expand the program.
So what can we do about that? Just looking for a solution. If there seems to be this problem with the system, but kids are still, getting hurt or in this case dying, what can we do to really fix this problem?
Well, start small. I always say first start small. Look around you. Are there family members of yours in trouble? Are there friends of your children that are in trouble? If you want to help a child that's near you, please do. Then if you want to expand out, you could always try to become a foster parent. The more foster parents we have, the more people that actually care and are willing to take in kids like this home. That means that the more social services can take children away from abusive homes. So instead of trying to change the bigger system and worried about the government, if every person just if half the people that want to do something became foster parents, we wouldn't be having this problem because we'd have good kids with good homes.
Right. Great advice there. And also, like we mentioned, if you see something, say something. If you feel like, you see a child and they may be hurt, of course, report that. And so just like in Nola's situation, with the body reportedly being malnourished, could schools, doctors, or neighbors have missed key signs of abuse or neglect?
Absolutely. And pay attention. Children fall, but pay attention to where the bruises are. Be not afraid to speak up because you can save a child, whether or not it be from actual imminent death or from a lifetime of abuse and trauma. And abuse and trauma, as we know, leads to people becoming drug addicts or going out and leaving school because they just want to leave home at young ages of 13, 14, 15. So don't be afraid to speak up when you see signs of a child that's really dirty, that never gets a shower, that is bruises in odd places. As a parent, if social services were to come knock on my door because someone saw something with my child because she broke her toe last week during cheerleading, I would rather social services come to my door and make sure that my child is okay. And I wouldn't be mad at whoever called, although I swear nobody has a reason to call. But I'd rather social services double and triple checking me and others than letting another child die.
Right. Because who knows, you could be saving a life when doing that. So with the investigation, how do investigators backtrack a child's life to determine if there were earlier missed opportunities for intervention?
They talk. They talk to the teachers. They talk to daycare providers, family, friends, cousins, and they just backtrack everything. It's all about an investigation and research of what was this child's life actually like. And they go through everything and they find out who should have seen what.
We talked a little bit about the jury already, but in cases like this one, just such an emotional case, a 3-year-old child now dead. What makes a jury more likely to be emotionally swayed in a case involving a child, and what do prosecutors have to be cautious about?
Well, children are innocent. I am getting worked up talking about this case myself because it is so heartbreaking that a mother could do this to their own child. And I think that the prosecution, they don't have to be nasty to either the possible defendants, right? If this actually goes to trial, all they have to do is just lay the evidence out there. As the prosecutor, they're going to want to be more straight facts, because these facts are going to make anyone emotional. There's not much that the prosecution has to do other than lay it out there calmly and rationally and objectively, so that way the jurors can soak it in and their emotions will do the rest.
And before I let you go, as a criminal defense attorney, how would you begin to defend both of these defendants?
Well, first, you want to see if there's any deal to be made, if there's anything that you could do with the prosecution, because this is going to be an extremely tough case in a court of law. Next, I would look for every single piece of evidence that points, let's say I was her defense attorney, I would want every single piece of evidence that points to her boyfriend being involved in beatings, pointing to her boyfriend in the suitcase, pointing to her boyfriend egging her on. Maybe even signs, did he abuse the child? Did he abuse her? You really want to poke holes in the relationship and try to point out coercion and, less innocence. So a lot more innocence with your defendant. It's all about pointing fingers at the other side.
Well, this is a case that we will be following closely. Jessica, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Cedrick Britten is being held in police custody without bond. For Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.